All right. So, welcome everybody. My name is Ben Martens. I'm the executive director of the Maine Coast Fishermen's Association. I really appreciate everybody who's taken the time to join us today. We have a lot of fishermen and community members from Maine, but I also know that we've got a lot of guests joining us from around the country as well. So, thank you for helping us start up this off. I would just like to start by saying, like, this is all brand new to us. This is our first webinar, so if we screw it up, I'm sorry. But we are all kind of figuring this out together in the weirdness. So please give us a little leeway, and we'll take it from there. For those that don't know us, the Maine Coast Fishermen's Association is an industry-based nonprofit. We work with fishermen on policy work, but the idea is, how do we rebuild the fisheries of the Gulf of Maine and sustain Maine's fishing communities for future generations? We want to make sure that the fishermen are there so that when the fish come back, we have vibrant fishing communities and the fishermen to go catch them. So for today's webinar, we're just going to go through a couple of quick overhead ground rules. Everybody's on mute. This is a webinar. The only people who are going to be able to talk today are the presenters. And thank you, presenters, for taking some time out of your very, very busy days to join us this afternoon. The meeting is being recorded. This will be on our website later on tonight, both as a video file and as an audio file. So if there's anything that you missed that you want to come back to, it'll be on our website, mainecoastfishermen.org. Probably 8, 9 o'clock tonight. The next thing is, for those of you that have a question or have an issue, please raise that issue or question through the question and answer box. If you look at your webinar, it's down on the bottom, Q&A, you hit that. That's where we're going to be taking all the questions for the webinar today, is through the Q&A box. Anything that doesn't get answered, we're going to try and pull those resources together and share afterwards. But hopefully, with the time that we have today, we'll be able to answer all of your questions. We do have, the plan is we're going to have very short presentations from our presenters and a quick overview of the different programs that are available, some specific questions on those programs, and then at the end, we will have a larger chunk of time dedicated to Q&A. So, with that being said, let me quickly introduce the staff who's going to be running point for the rest of the meeting. So we've got Karen Baker, who works with the Maine Coast Fishermen's Association. She's going to be in charge of the flow for the rest of the webinar. And then we've got Jessica Joyce and Mary Hudson, who are going to be fielding your questions and feeding those into the system. So please let me know if you've got questions. Go through the Q&A. If you've got technical stuff, there's different ways that you can reach out to us, etc. So with that, I will turn it over to Karen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. And to reiterate what Ben just stated, thank you all for taking the time out to attend our webinar. We here at Maine Coast Fishermen's Association have been working very hard to put together a group of experts in order to provide as much helpful information as possible in such a rapidly changing situation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Susan DeGrossier. Susan's a business advisor for the Maine Small Business Development Center. She will be discussing the PPP, also known as the Paycheck Protection Program, and the EIDL, which is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. At the end, Susan will be answering some questions you may have, so feel free to ask them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Hi, Susan.
Hi, thank you
for joining us.
Thank you, Karen.
Before you start, Susan, can you tell us a bit about what you do at the Maine Small Business Development Center?
Absolutely. So the Small Business Development Center is actually a national organization. We're in every state. In the state of Maine, I believe we have 12 offices. We provide complimentary and confidential business advising service to anybody that is in business or looking to start a business. And currently we are still operating in full force, and we're doing a lot of our meetings via Zoom or telephone or email. So I will be sharing contact information. If any of you would like to set up an appointment to meet with an advisor in the state of Maine. You can click on that link, and if anybody is joining from other states, just do a search for Small Business Development Center, and it will come up for sure. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so as I said, we offer free and confidential business advising service. You'll see some contact information hopefully down in the bottom right-hand side of the screen, but we can be reached at mainesbdc.org if you want to set up an appointment. And again, it's all confidential. So there's two programs that I'm sure most of you have all heard about. One is known as the EIDL, which is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Fund, and the other one is the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP. Last week, both funds were shut down as they ran out of money. As most of you probably know, the Senate approved funding on Tuesday, and we're hoping that the House will pass that today. So these should both, we anticipate both of them will be refunded. So your timing to participate is perfect. So I'll start with the EIDL, which is on the left-hand column here. The benefit of that is that program allows you up to a $10,000 advance that would not need to be repaid, so essentially a grant. It is based on the number of employees, and the way they work it is $1,000 per employee is how they figure out how much you would actually qualify for. It's open to any small business, including sole proprietor, including a 1099 contractor. You can borrow up to $2 million. The interest rate is 3.75%, and it amortizes up to 30 years for repayment. You can basically use that money for the EIDL for any of your business expenses, working capital, to pay debts, accounts payable, anything like that. The SBA administers this loan, and they do base the loan on credit history and a repayment ability. They have not disclosed to us really what particular number they're looking for. I think they're looking at each application in its entirety. There is no collateral required for that loan for any loan under $25,000. So if you're over 25, then collateral would be required. And again, it's administered directly through the SBA. You would apply on their website, and they would be the ones to disperse the funds. Right now, if you go to that link that is listed down on the bottom here, you're not going to be able to apply. Once the funds are refunded, you'll be able to click on that link and go through the application, which I will get into detail as we go on. So the Paycheck Protection Program is 100% forgivable if you keep employees and you use 75% or more for payroll. And that includes a self-employed individual to pay themselves. Any small business is eligible, again, sole proprietor, 1099 contractors, anybody self-employed. The amount of that loan is 2.5 times your average monthly payroll, or paycheck, if you will. And I'm going to get into that a little further on to show you how we calculate that, or how the banks will calculate that. The interest rate on that loan, should it not be forgiven, is 1% up to 2-year repayment on that. The caveat on that program is that you have to use it for payroll. It's designed to use for payroll, including benefits, interest on your mortgage, business mortgage, rent, or utilities. As far as the lending criteria, the banks are just collecting the information based on payroll, and so there's not really a major criteria that's set forth for that. There is no collateral required for that, and you will apply for that program directly through your bank, and they will be the ones that will be administering the funds. Okay, so who can apply? What are proceeds to be used for, where and when? I'm going to go a little deeper into that. So again, any LLC, an S Corp, a C Corp, sole proprietor, 1099 contractor, you are all eligible to apply. The loan proceeds of this program are designed to cover payroll costs, interest on mortgage obligations that were incurred before February 15th, 2020. In other words, if you bought something after that, it wouldn't be considered or covered, rent and utility costs that were enforced before February 15th, 2020. And then the money is to be spent over an 8-week period. And that clock starts ticking after the loan has been made. In other words, after the money has gone into your account. And again, you'll apply directly through your bank or credit union. I've heard that some folks have banks that are not offering the program. There's not that many. There's been a lot of great credit unions that are offering this program. So if your bank doesn't offer it, you can certainly apply at another bank. Okay, so how do you figure out how much you'll qualify for? There's 3 methods. The first one is looking at payroll records. So if you have a payroll, what you will do is you'll take your previous 12 months payroll or your payroll from the calendar year of 2019. So you need 12 months. And then you're going to divide that by 12 to come up with an average or a 1-month average payroll. You'll take that 1-month average and you're going to actually multiply it by 2.5. So here's an example. Let's say you have $100,000 in payroll. You're going to divide that by 12. You're going to come up with $8,333 and some odd change. And then you will multiply that by 2.5. So in this scenario, this business would be eligible they would qualify for $20,833. Okay, that's basing it on payroll records. Another way to figure it is through a tax return. So a sole proprietor who essentially doesn't really have any employees other than themselves, because remember, you are the employee of the company. The banks are going to use your tax return, and they're going to look at your net earnings, basically what your profit was on that business. And they're going to take that and divide it by 12 to come up with what your 1-month average pay is. Again, then they'll multiply that by 2.5. So the example here, $75,000 in net earnings. Again, taken from the tax returns. They'll divide that by 12, and then they'll take that figure, in this case, $6,250, and multiply it by 2.5. So this individual would be would qualify for $15,625. And then the third way is through a 1099. So I know a lot of fishermen are paid, maybe the crew is paid through as a 1099 contractor. So what you would do is you would total up all of your 1099s for 2019. If you haven't filed for your tax return, you could use your 2018, by the way. You're going to divide those by 12 to come up with your 1-month average pay. So you're going to go through the same routine. You're going to multiply by 2.5. So in this example, 72,000 from the 1099s divided by 12 is 6,000. Multiplied by 2.5 is 15,000. So this independent contractor that has 1099s in this scenario would qualify for the PP program of $15,000. And this is important to do this exercise ahead of time, because when we get to the application, which I'll show you, you're going to need to be able to answer this question. There are some seasonal businesses out there, and do not shoot the messenger, because I did not choose this seasonal calendar, and I don't know any business in Maine that has a seasonal business that falls under these dates, but these were what we have to work with. So the calculations for average monthly payroll, you can choose for those businesses that were open in 2019, you can use either February 15th through June 30th of 2019, or March 1st through June 30th of 2019. And then for any new business that opened in this year, 2020, you would use January 1 through February 29. Okay, so when and what can I use the proceeds for? And some of this is repetitive, but it's very important that you understand. So the proceeds for the PPP is to be spent in the 8 weeks from the date the money is deposited into your account. What you can use it on is payroll, rent, interest on mortgage payments, and utilities. So payroll, even if your boat is out of the water and not fishing, and you have actual employees, so you have somebody that you pay on payroll, you would need to pay them from these proceeds, even if they're not working. Mortgage interest. Now, I spoke with the SBA because many fishermen, obviously they're operating from a boat, so they don't have a brick and mortar office that has a mortgage on it per se. So the SBA representative that I spoke to said that In her mind, a first preferred ship's mortgage interest would qualify under the mortgage interest deduction. And that there aren't any hard and fast rules seen on this yet, but that seems to make the most sense for your industry. With regards to rent and utilities, I asked about that as well because I know that you have dock and wharf fees and fuel, and the response that she gave me and I also kind of came up with is that however your accountant or your bookkeeper records those expenses on your tax returns is whether it would qualify. So in other words, if your dock and wharf fees and your fuel were categorized under utilities on your tax returns, then those would be eligible. But remember, for the loan to be forgiven, you have to use a minimum of 75% is to be used for payroll. And then the 25% is allowable for the mortgage interest and utilities. And if you follow those guidelines, then the loan would be completely forgiven. And so a 1099 contractor, if you didn't have any of those expenses, you have to use a minimum of 75% to be used for payroll. So that means you could use all of it for payroll. Okay, so the application. So again, it's going to be available at your bank. Many banks and credit unions have these applications on their website. And I suggest to all of you that when you finish with this webinar tonight, that you go and take a look at your bank's website and see if the application is up there. And if it is, fill it out and get in queue, get in line for the funds that will become available, hopefully in the next day or so. Some documents that you may need to apply, it depends on the bank. Some of them have some forms that they're going to have you fill out in addition to the application, but it's not very much. But have your tax returns prepared or ready. Have your payroll records. That'll be very important. If you haven't filed your 2019 tax returns yet, that's okay. They will accept your 2018. For independent contractors, you need your 1099s. Okay, so here's a look at the application itself. I'm going to tell you, it's actually not that bad. You want to make sure that you check off in the very top left-hand corner what is appropriate to you. So if you're a sole proprietor, if you're a partnership, a C Corp, S Corp, independent contractor, that would be a 1099, by the way. Whatever that is, you check that off. Your business legal name is the name of your business. Again, if you're a 1099 and you don't have an actual business name, you would put your name in there, your address. You fill in the business EIN number, or if you're a sole proprietor or a 1099, you would put your social security number in there, and then just fill in the rest of the information. Now, this is why I went into explaining how you have to figure your average monthly payroll, because you need to know that figure, okay? In those examples that I gave you before, this is where you would put that average monthly payroll in, right here. And then it says multiply by 2.5, which is what you would then fill in here. If you notice, it says on here 2.5 plus the EIDL. Now, there are some businesses that already applied for the EIDL and they received, let's say, $1,000 from the grant portion because it was a business that has one employee. When you go to get forgiveness on the PPP loan, they will subtract whatever grant, whatever you were given on the EIDL, that initial advance will be subtracted from that, and that will become a loan at 1%. And I know that's a little confusing, so we can go into that a little more later. Number of employees, very important. So you need to make sure you fill that in accurately based on whatever you used to figure your monthly payroll. So if you use 2019 payroll records and you had 10 employees, that's what you would fill in here. It's not what you have now for employees. It's whatever you use to figure that monthly payroll. So again, a sole proprietor, 1099, make sure you put 1 in here for you because you are an employee. So you want to fill that in. Purpose of the loan, I suggest you click off payroll, lease, mortgage, interest, utilities, all of that. It's just kind of asking what you're going to use the money for. The next section is asking about ownership. This would be for any owners that own 20% or more of the business. So if you have a multi-member LLC, this is where you would put the owner's names, their title, and how much of the business their ownership is. The second page of the application and third page are all just questions. So really it's just the first page that you have to really do any math, if you will. which was that exercise that I showed you. So you're going to go through this. You're going to answer yes or no, go all the way through, and then you're going to go to the next page, do the same thing, and then finally you have to certify basically that all of the information is accurate, that you understand the program. You would sign it and date it, and that's it. So that's the whole PPP application, as well as anything that your bank may ask you to submit for supporting documents. Okay, so let's say you get approved. Now what do you do? So what will happen is the lender will say, okay, you've been approved for $10,000. At that point, they have 10 calendar days from the date of approval to actually disperse the funds into your account. How much of the PP will be forgiven? Okay, so you will owe money when your loan is due if you use the loan amount for anything other than payroll costs, mortgage interest, rent, utilities over the 8 weeks after getting the loan. I know I'm repeating, but it's very important to understand that. So your number of staff, number of employees, your loan forgiveness would also be reduced if you decreased your full-time employee headcount. It doesn't mean you have to have the same employees. So let's say you try to bring some of your employees back and they don't want to come back, you bring others back, that's fine. Your loan forgiveness would also be reduced if you decrease salaries and wages. So you don't want to bring people back and pay them less than what you were paying them, at least not more than 25%. Rehiring, this is a touchy subject because remember we have those 8 weeks to use the money, but it might take a little longer to get some of your employees back. So they're allowing you until June 30th to restore your full-time employment and salary levels. Okay, so forgiveness. How do you request the loan forgiveness? This will be set up by the bank, but essentially you're going to submit a request to the lender, the bank that you got the loan, asking for the forgiveness, and there will be some document that you'll fill out. But you want to make sure that you have documents prepared. Essentially, keep your receipts for any utilities that you pay, your mortgage interest, and your payroll records, because you will be asked to show that. And then the lender has to make a decision within 60 days of forgiveness. If part of your PPP converts into a loan, your loan payment will be deferred for 6 months, so you won't have a payment for 6 months. And then any amount of the loan forgiven as part of the PPP is excluded from gross income. So it's not going to be taxable on your 2020 tax returns. Okay, so I'm going to jump into the economic injury disaster loan. Who can apply? What are proceeds to be used for? Where and when? Anybody essentially can apply that is an LLC, S Corp, C Corp, sole proprietor, 1099 contractor, any small business with less than 500 employees. These loan proceeds can be used for any business expense, working capital to pay vendors, to pay mortgages, any expense that you have for the business. One of the questions I get asked all the time is, I filled out the application, but I didn't see anywhere where it said, ask me how much I want to borrow. They won't, nowhere on the application do they ask that. You just go through and fill out the application, which is only about, I think it's 3 or 4 pages, but again, there's not a lot of numbers that you have to use. It's more contact information, that kind of thing. But based on what you fill out, they will determine how much they will then offer you. So for the SBA to help determine how much loan you would qualify for, one thing that I know that that is on the application, it's going to ask you what your gross sales were, and then any cost of goods. And then after you apply, they may come back to you and ask for supporting documents such as tax returns. So what happens is you apply, and then you wait, quite frankly, you just wait. And what has happened in the past, and when they refund, it may still work this way, but what they did in the past is if you qualified, they would just make a deposit into your account. So remember I mentioned that initial advance portion, which is $1,000 per employee. I have several businesses, many businesses that just all of a sudden had a check of $4,000 deposited into their account, or $1,000, or whatever it is, because it was based on their application, the number of employees that they had entered, and the SBA did not send out any notice stating that that had happened. They just noticed in their bank account. And then the next thing that would happen is you will be contacted by the SBA with an offer stating, okay, this is how much you qualify for a loan. You can accept it or you can reduce it. You don't have to take all. If they offer you $25,000 or $30,000, but you don't want to have to put up any collateral, remember that number is 25, so you might want to accept just under 25. You can certainly do that. They will also tell you what the payment terms will be at that time as well. Unfortunately, I will tell you that there's no way to check on these applications. The one thing I'll say is the SBA, the Disaster Loan Program, which has been in existence for a very long time, the SBA has done a fantastic job handling disasters. But if you remember, if you think about how these was originally set up, they're set up for a geographic, like, you know, a flood or a hurricane or tornadoes, and then the SBA would come in and they were working with one area. In this particular case, they're dealing with businesses across the country. So it's really impossible for them to follow up with you to answer questions, whether, you know, where your application is. What I'm telling my clients is just to be patient. There's no time period for the money to be spent. So unlike the PPP, once you get your loan, you can just spend it however and whenever you need for your business expenses. To apply for this, you will do it directly at the SBA website as soon as the program has been refunded. I would recommend that you pay attention, and as soon as you see it, you read it, or it's announced that the program has been refunded, that you go directly to the SBA website and click on the application and get your application in. So just to conclude, just one more time, here's the two programs, the EIDL, the PPP. Just remembering the EIDL is a loan with an advance component of it. And if you do get an advance, that portion of it would be forgiven. The PPP is originally set out as a forgivable loan. So if you meet the criteria for the program, 100% of the proceeds would be forgiven. Okay, so I am going to stop sharing my screen and I'll take questions, I guess, at the end.
Thank you so much, Susan. That was great and very informative. I appreciate it, and I'm sure everyone else does. Before I toss it over to Jessica and Mary for some of the Q&A questions, I have a couple of questions that we received electronically prior to the webinar that if you had already answered, I apologize, and you can just let me know. So here we go. What if I do not have a relationship with a bank, or my bank is not accepting applications at this time? Do I need to open a business checking account?
So it depends on the lending institution. My experience is that most banks or credit unions are stating that you do need to open an account there, which makes sense because you'll be their customer, and because they actually need an account to deposit the money into.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Next question. What is the status of the EIDL loan applications and advances, and how does that interface with the PPP? And to extend on that question, they're also stating we had to apply twice, once with an old application and once with an extensive application that ended up being an application that was streamlined under the CARES Act, and haven't been able to find out any info on the status of either application. Yeah, those are all really good questions and comments. So first of all, the EIDL program, it has gone through many changes. It did come out, I think there's been 3 changes. The first application process was very difficult. In fact, I did a webinar on how to get through the application. So they did that, and then they came out with a second application that you then had to go back in and apply for. The second application was just a couple of pages. It was very simple. And one way to remember, I have clients that are confused. They're not sure if they actually filled out the second one. And the best way that I can get you to remember is on the second application, it clearly states, if you qualify for up to a $10,000 advance, would you want it? So you have to say yes or no. And then if you do, you have to put your bank account number in. So that's how you'll know if you did it. And then after you do that, you will get a confirmation number from them.
And then trust me when I say you will not hear anything again. You will wait and wait and wait. And then you will, if you succeed, if you're successful in getting through the application through and qualify, you will get a deposit in that account that you listed on that application, and that's how you'll know. And then from there, it may be another series of days or even 2 weeks. You will then be contacted by the SBA through an email that will say, you now need to log in to this portal. It'll tell you how much you've qualified for, and it will ask you if you want to accept it or take less. You answer the questions, you submit that, and then again you wait. And then the third time, I believe they'll come back with some closing documents, and then it will go to dispersing the funds. The question about how the EIDL and the PPP relate, you can absolutely apply for both of them, and I highly recommend that you apply for both of them. The little bit of confusion is this part. Remember how I said the EIDL is going to advance. Let's just use $1,000. Let's say that you're a sole proprietor, you have one employee, it's yourself. I'm the employee, so I could get $1,000. So I get that $1,000, and then I apply for the PPP. And I'm approved at the PPP for $10,000. So if I follow all the guidelines of the PPP, my loan will be forgiven. However, they will deduct that $1,000 that I got from the EIDL from that $10,000. So if I followed everything right on the PPP and my loan is forgiven, I will have a loan of $1,000. But remember, it's 1% interest.
Right.
So.
Okay, great. That was great. So next question, Susan, is what documentation will you need to submit at the end of your 8-week period in order to be eligible for the forgiveness?
Another great question. Yeah. So we haven't seen any actual forgiveness application, if you will, yet, or forms, but I'm quite certain that you definitely are going to have to document where you spent the money. And that doesn't mean, I've had clients say, well, gee, should I keep it in a separate account? You don't have to do that. But what you'll need to do is, if you have payroll, you'll need to provide payroll documents, just like you did when you applied. So you'll do it for that 8-week period. You'll have to answer some questions, most likely, like, did you maintain your employees? And then if you also are, if you use part of the money for interest payments on your boat mortgage or utility payments, they're going to want to see records of that. So keep all of that paperwork. That is our assumption at this point. They may ask for less, but definitely they're going to want those documents.
Okay, great. So there is a little bit of concern, I guess, and the question is, what happens when the money runs out again? Will you see another rollout, you think?
Well, if I were in the Senate or in the Congress, I would say yes, you will. That's another great question. We don't know, and obviously we are all so in the thick of this right now. I mean, 8 weeks ago seemed so far away, but now it seems like right around the corner, right? Because we're all living in this. So we don't know what will happen next, if and when. So unfortunately, I can't answer that question. But you can reach out to your legislature and try to lobby for more money for sure.
Okay. So last question, Susan, and I wonder if you've already answered this in a nutshell. How long has it been taking banks and the SBA to underwrite and process the PPP and the EIDL loans, and when will people start seeing the money? I know some people have already said that they have seen some money.
Yeah. Yep. So the PPP definitely moved the fastest. The banks did an excellent job, and if you remember, I mean, they're in the business of lending, right? So as soon as they received all of the guidance and the rules from the Treasury, from the U.S. Treasury and the SBA, they were able to start accepting applications, and they've done an incredible job. And literally, I know the banks worked through the weekends processing applications to get them done. So many clients, many businesses heard, within a week that they had been approved or denied. I honestly did not hear of, I don't have any clients that were denied. That doesn't mean you wouldn't be, but if you follow the guidelines that I showed in the previous slides, and you can document everything, and apply before the money runs out, you have a very good chance of getting it. So you just have to wait. So that one moved really quickly. The EIDL, I have many clients that applied like March 18th when it first came out, and they didn't receive the advance until last week. So that's like a month, right? But one of the things to remember about that is, again, how the SBA is structured and how they handle disasters, and how they were set up to handle disasters. This is something they've never had to face before, the entire US all applying at once on one website. So I'm pretty confident that they have it much, it's under better control, but it's still, we've got a lot of people and a lot of applications. So I just have to say to be really, really patient on that particular application.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Susan. That was a bunch of great information. Before I toss it to Jessica Joyce and Mary Hudson to open it to audience questions from the Q&A box, I would like to state to our audience, anyone who has asked any questions while Susan was talking, if you feel your question has already been answered, go ahead and dismiss it so Jessica and Mary know which questions they're going to be asking to Susan. Okay. Jessica and Mary?
Thanks, Karen. Following up on the heels of your question on EIDL loans, we have a question here that they received an EIDL confirmation number, but no award. And they were wondering if the application will be in queue for the future funding.
So even though the funding ran out, they may already be in queue for the original pot, if you will, but just haven't received their initial disbursement yet. So I would say don't give up hope yet, and they don't need to reapply either. So for those people that received a confirmation, this is how I know it today. If that changes, we will make sure everybody knows that, okay, if you applied before and you didn't get it on the first round, you need to apply again. But I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that at all. If they have a confirmation number, it's just a matter of waiting. And like I used an example, I think I had, many clients that waited over a month before they received that initial advance money into their account. And then from there, it was another 2 weeks before they received an email from the SBA saying, okay, now here's the loan amount that we're going to offer you.
Thanks. So this question is, how would you figure payroll if you are an LLC taxed as an S Corp? Do you include shareholder distributions or only W-2 wages?
So that's an interesting question. So you definitely would do your payroll, and then the owners of the business are also eligible to be paid. So they would use, I'm not exactly sure if it would be their K-1 or how it's taken from their tax returns. That's probably a question they're going to have to ask their bank. But I know that the owners of a company, as well as oftentimes they're not on payroll, and sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not. They are eligible for to be considered or counted into that figure as well. The one thing you want to be careful about is there are a lot of businesses, especially I think in the fishing industry, that have employees, but then they also have independent contractors, right? One thing you can't do is report the wages and the payroll and the 1099s on your business application. The independent contractors that are paid by a 1099, they have to apply on their own.
Great, thank you. And I'll read one more question from the box and have Mary read one more, and then we'll transition to our next speaker. This person is asking if the PPP loan funded payroll to employees requires withholding Social Security, Medicare, and FICA withholdings.
Yes, you would process your payroll just as you have done in the past.
So I'm having trouble finding it, but there was a question about whether the EIDL could be used to refinance high interest boat mortgages.
I don't see why not. It's for any business expense. So that's a business expense.
Okay, Karen, I'm going to turn it back to you to introduce our next speaker. And for everyone that has questions, we will have 30 minutes after all the speakers to get through these. So we will continue to answer these questions. Karen.
Thank you, Jessica. Okay, so our second speaker is Steve Veazey, the guy in the headphones. Steve is the Maine District Director for SCORE. Steve is going to tell us about mentors lined up to assist folks with their applications on Friday. Hi, Steve. Thank you for giving your time to us.
Hi, Karen. Thank you very much. And thank you, Ben, for including me today. I want to tell people just a little bit about SCORE, and then we'll get to the mentoring arrangements. So SCORE's been helping small businesses for more than 50 years with about 10,000 volunteers across the U.S. We're a 501c3 organization and a resource partner of the U.S. Small Business Administration. In Maine, SCORE has 135 volunteer mentors spread across the state, and we serve clients at all stages of the business life cycle, from pre-start through growth to exit. Our primary services are confidential, free, one-on-one mentoring services, as well as educational business workshops. In the past few weeks, we've been really busy assisting many clients in navigating the CARES Act programs to access much needed funds. We've been helping clients understand the various loan terms, with emphasis on both the application information that has just been reported on and the loan forgiveness requirements. Tomorrow, many of you may be working on your PPP or EIDL applications, and SCORE will have mentors available all day tomorrow to answer your calls. So on the screen, you can see the names of our mentors. There's a schedule of when they'll be available. If you're working between 9 and 11 and you've got a question, you're going to send an email to me with your name, phone number, and zip code for an immediate callback and real-time answer to your questions. So we'll, and throughout the day, we'll have people available to help you with it. So any questions, fair game. If we don't immediately know the answer, we'll find an answer and get back to you. But that's what we'll be doing tomorrow as people launch into preparing these applications if they've not already done so. Our advice is free and it's experience-based. So don't hesitate to contact us tomorrow. That's it. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate that, and everyone else does as well. I just want to make sure everyone is aware with the attendees that these slides that you're seeing with all of this contact information, it will be made available after the webinar. So if people are scrambling, trying to write down contact info, it will be made available post-webinar.
Will it also be on your website, Karen?
Yes, it will. Yeah. Maybe a little later this evening, there's going to be some logistics to have to go through, but it will all be made available.
Thank you.
Yeah, Karen, I'm just going to jump in for one quick moment here and just stress that the reason why we've been working with SCORE, we've got a handful of other volunteers that will also be listed on our website. For those of you not in Maine, we've been coordinating with other local fishing organizations around the country as well to start lining up volunteers. Because of how quickly we believe that this money is going to move, we are encouraging anybody who wants to participate in these projects to do so tomorrow. The money may not be available tomorrow, but you need to start working on your applications. You need to start talking to your banks. You need to start lining up all your paperwork now if you want to get in line. And so this is our way as Maine Coast Fishermen's Association, other fishing organizations around the country, and people who care about the fishing communities to say, if this is something you want to do, tomorrow is the day to move. And so we want to put as many resources at your disposal to do so.
Great, thank you, Ben. Another thing I want to touch on before we move on to our next speaker is there are some questions that are still in the Q&A that have not been answered or asked by Jessica or Mary. They will be addressed at the end of the webinar, so don't fret. Finally, we have Cynthia Murphy. Hi, Cynthia. Cynthia is a Senior Program Director of Workforce with Coastal Enterprises, Inc., also known as CEI. She will be talking about unemployment benefits in the state of Maine and will be answering questions you may have. So again, feel free to type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Hi, Cynthia. Thank you for joining us. Before you start, can you tell us a bit about CEI and what you do there?
Hi, yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here today. So I head Workforce Solutions at Coastal Enterprises, Inc., or CEI, which is an economic development nonprofit organization based in Brunswick. And we provide business advice, much along the lines of what you've heard Susan and Steve talk about earlier. We also provide investment and funding and technical advice, including a team that specializes in fisheries and food systems work. So I'm here today to share what we know about unemployment benefits that are related to COVID-19. And there's just been an amazing flurry of activity about unemployment, almost as much as there may have been about the loans that Susan just talked about. And the activity that's happened as it relates to unemployment is both at the federal and state level. Regardless of where the funding is coming from, if you're interested in unemployment, filing for it, or having someone on your team file for it, all of the filing work happens through the State Department of Labor, Bureau of Unemployment Compensation. And I have their website link in the slide that follows this. You might notice in the upper right-hand corner that I have a note that's current through today, April 23rd, 2020. And data is changing and information is flowing. And so we do recommend that you check the Department of Labor website frequently for the most up-to-date information. So what's been happening? Well, as I said, the federal government and the state government have come together to expand eligibility for unemployment to more workers than we've ever seen before. The benefit period has been lengthened, and probably most importantly, more money has been made available through unemployment, putting more money in the pockets of Mainers than we've ever seen before. So let's talk a little bit about eligibility. Those of you who are looking at the screen can see on the left-hand side that full and part-time workers at any business that has been either temporarily or permanently closed related to COVID-19 are eligible for unemployment benefits. Anyone who is working reduced hours, so if you were operating 40 hours a week and now you're operating 20 hours a week, you or anyone on your team is eligible for unemployment benefits associated with that gap. Something that's new is for folks who are taking unpaid leave related to COVID-19, either because they've got to stay home and take care of their children who are not in school or we're at a child care provider that is closed, and also folks who are at an elevated risk for COVID-19 and any knock-on effects, taking unpaid leave would also be eligible for unemployment. If you own a business and you are paying unemployment taxes, maybe you're an S Corp or whatever other reason is you're paying unemployment taxes, you are also eligible right now to apply. There's been a fair amount of press about new coverage that's available for sole proprietors, single owner LLCs, freelancers, gig workers, independent contractors, etc. And unemployment benefits will be available for that group of Mainers. However, it is not available yet. The Department of Labor is still working through the details. And when this is live, it will be retroactive to whenever it is that you temporarily or permanently closed your business. Retroactive to February 2nd of 2020. So some of you are probably wondering, well, what can I do now to get ready for when I can apply? So what you can do is you can start to collect your tax documents. We don't know exactly what will be required, but in looking at the other states that have gone live, and there are a handful of states that are now providing unemployment benefits for sole proprietors, we do know that they're looking at tax returns. So if you have a Schedule C, if you have an SE, if you have 1099s, whatever your tax documents are, start to gather that, put it all in one place. I have seen in a couple of states where they have commentary that if you don't have tax documents for whatever reason, that you should start to collect up invoices or any other documentation that you have that proves that you were self-employed. You also want to start to collect up and firmly document how it is that you are unemployed related to COVID-19. So it could be one of the governor's executive orders, or it could be something else that you have to prove that is the reason why you are closed. So there are a couple of other requirements around eligibility that pertain to people generally as it relates to unemployment. I'll touch on them briefly, and then if people have questions about them, I'm happy to handle them in the group discussion, or you're welcome to contact me later for a one-on-one session. So what the Department of Labor does here in Maine is they pull for people with W-2s, they pull the last 5 calendar quarters of wages. They look at the they look at the first 4 of the last 5. And if you've totaled roughly more than $5,200, you've passed the first threshold of eligibility. There are a couple of other thresholds, and I've got a link on the following screen. And as I said, I'm happy to take questions about that should they be of interest to the group. So let's say you're eligible. What do you get? There's a calculation that the Department of Labor Bureau of Unemployment Compensation runs based on how much money you made. If you were a W-2 worker, then the calculation is based on those quarters that I just referenced. They divide by 22, and that gives you your weekly benefit amount. There's a maximum weekly benefit of $445 a week. When we combine together both the state and what the federal government is chipping in, you're eligible for unemployment for up to 39 weeks. And new, associated with the federal stimulus package, every single person receiving unemployment benefits will receive an extra $600 a week from March 29th through July 25th. So that's on top of the calculation that I mentioned a few minutes ago. When you're ready to apply, you should apply online. If you do need to contact them via telephone, if you look at their website, they have a schedule for call-ins based on the first initial of your last name. Just a couple of other comments where I take questions. There are a few aspects of unemployment that are different related to the pandemic. And one is that there's typically a requirement to search for work when you're receiving unemployment benefits. That's been waived. Secondly, there's no week holdback period. So someone can earn unemployment benefits from the time that they were out of work related to COVID-19. And then finally, most important, I think, is that if workers apply, or if a sole proprietor applies, the business experience rating is not negatively affected by that filing. So you have questions about unemployment benefits. I'm really happy to take them through the Q&A function. So Karen, do we have any questions yet?
Actually, I have a couple myself before I toss it to Jessica and Mary again. And you may have, I mean, the $1 million question really is, and this is the first one on my list, is are independent contractors who receive 1099s eligible to receive unemployment benefits? So we already know currently they cannot do that just yet. Is there any idea where it is on the horizon?
You know, I don't know, we'd have to have DOL on the phone for that. They've been very communicative about their work on this. They have started to implement other aspects of the stimulus bill, which is where this came through. This is next on their list. And you know, I think they're looking to some of the other states who have implemented it for guidance, and they're working quite hard at it. You know, I guess I should say that, of course, the Department of Labor has been staffed for below 2.5% unemployment rate. And, you know, the numbers of inquiries and the numbers of requests that they're receiving is sky high. They've done an amazing job at hiring and bringing in people from across the Department of Labor. I believe they've hired an incremental 100 people. So they're really staffing up, and they're very focused on creating a system that works for the sole proprietors, but we don't have a date yet.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Cynthia. Another question is, can the single member of an LLC apply for unemployment benefits?
Same category as the sole proprietor or the
Right.
gig worker or the freelancer. So they are eligible, and when that's open, they should absolutely apply.
Okay. Final question for you, Cynthia, from me is, if you are eligible and receive a forgivable loan from PPP, let's say, after the 8-week period, if it is implemented for sole proprietors and independent contractors to then apply for unemployment benefits, can they do so at that time?
Yeah, sure. Great question. I'm really glad that you've asked that. And so you can't overlap the two. You can't be on unemployment and if you're a sole prop, let's take that example.
Right.
So you can't be on unemployment and using your 8 weeks that Susan talked about earlier at the same time. But you can be on unemployment before and unemployment afterwards. So that's something that we've been helping sole proprietors with, taking a look at what their tax returns show and using the estimates that we have to help them figure out what the timing might be. You've got 10 days, as Susan mentioned earlier, or the bank has 10 days to disperse the funds after approving your loan. So, but there are a variety of ways to look at it and take advantage of that $600 a week incremental, roughly from April through July.
Great. Thank you so much for everything, Cynthia. That was wonderful information. We're going to go back to Jessica and Mary to field some of the questions in the Q&A related to Cynthia and what she just presented.
Thanks, Karen. We definitely have a few questions on unemployment, and then we're going to open it up for the rest of the time for about 30 minutes to get through the list that we have and continue. Right now we have 50 questions, so we're going to do our best to get through all of them. For those that we may not get to, we're going to do our best to have them answered offline and post them later on, probably tomorrow. So the first question that we have here on unemployment, someone was wondering, as far as unemployment benefits, if you earn income in a different state than you live in, which state are you supposed to file in? Your resident state, the state you work in, or both?
So let's answer that offline. I have a link from DOL on that, and so I'd rather provide their official answer. Is that okay?
Yeah, okay. So we will get that question on the website or otherwise.
Great.
Mary?
Yes, so you might need some more info for this question, I'm not sure, but the question is, could you haul traps or dig clams while you are on unemployment if you're a sole proprietor?
So I believe that the way it may work, so they haven't issued the guidance yet, right? But the way that it may work is that if you look at the second bullet, for example, where I talked about if you're working reduced hours, so that applies to a sole proprietor too. So if you were earning a reduced income related to COVID-19, which might be this question, Mary, I'm not quite sure. I believe the way that it will work is you would be providing your income for the comparable period and then show the current income, and what there is a gap you would then be eligible for unemployment for. That's the current thinking. We have to wait and see what the guidance looks like.
Okay. Thanks. I have a question for someone who applied for unemployment benefits, but they are self-employed and a 1099. Do I need to reapply later, or will a call to Department of Labor be required?
Well, I'm so glad you asked, because what's happening now is if you apply and you're in this category of sole proprietors or 1099s, your claim is being rejected and you do need to reapply.
So along that sole proprietor line, if you file a Schedule C, can you still receive unemployment?
So Schedule C would be one of the tax documents that we expect the Maine Department of Labor, Bureau of Unemployment Compensation would be requesting to see what your income was to determine your amount. So the answer is yes.
Next question is, will those that applied and were approved for a PPP and or the EIDL loan still be eligible to apply for unemployment?
Yep, so if you can't overlap, but you could have unemployment before and after your PPP, as we, so if you, so say you were filing for unemployment in February and March, and you apply for the PPP now, and you receive your PPP the second week in May, you can't overlap that unemployment and PPP. So when you get the PPP, you have to go off of unemployment, but then you could go back on at the end of the 8-week period.
Can you repeat the threshold income for unemployment? Also, if you were claimed as a dependent in 2019, does that make you ineligible for unemployment?
Okay, on the threshold, it's roughly $5,200. It's actually $5,140.70, but it's roughly $5,200. I'll put the link in the content we have. And what they do is they look at the first 4 calendar quarters of the last 5 complete calendar quarters. And so those first 4 calendar quarters is where you need to total the roughly $5,200. If someone was claimed as a dependent and they're a first-time worker, which I think is at the heart of that question, Mary, there are provisions that are included in the stimulus bill that account for that. The state of Maine has not issued guidance for that. I believe that will come out at the same time as the sole proprietors. So I believe that they will have some way of figuring this out for first-time workers or people who haven't been working, who are now working.
Okay, let's take 2 more questions on unemployment, and then we'll open it up for the general questions and circle back to some of the PPP and EIDL questions. This person is a self-employed lobsterman who took a part-time job this winter as a fill-in with her off time on days when she was not fishing. Am I still able to file as a lobsterman? I wasn't employed at the store long enough to qualify for unemployment.
Yeah, I think so. I think you'll have to look at the guidance when it comes out, but I believe so, based on what I'm reading. I guess I would say that for anyone who has a gray area, when the sole proprietor and 1099 worker, et cetera, opens up, you should apply.
Yeah, I think most of the rest of the questions on unemployment are kind of that gray area. Like this one is, can you apply for unemployment if you were not actively fishing during the winter? So kind of a lot of these businesses are seasonal as is, and so there's some confusion around that.
Yeah, that'd be good to address that, Mary. I'm glad you brought that up. So as we keep saying, there's a lot that's unknown about how the income will be calculated for sole proprietors or 1099 workers or that category. Let me tell you the way they calculate it for W-2 workers. And the reason I'm going to tell you this is that it could be somewhat favorable if it's done the same way for someone in the situation that you were just telling me about, Mary. So they pull the last 5 complete calendar quarters. They look at the first 4 of those. The first threshold was did you roughly make more than $5,200 in that period? What they do with those first 4 calendar quarters is they take the highest 2 wage earning quarters and they average them together. And then they divide by 22 to get your weekly benefit amount. So if sole proprietors, 1099s, et cetera, are calculated the same way, which we don't know yet, but if they're calculated the same way, that could be quite favorable for seasonal workers.
Okay, thank you. At this point, I think we're going to transition into the general Q&A. So Mary and I are going to go back to the top of the box, and people can still feel free to type in questions. I will just make one comment that if you have a very unique situation to your business, because of the number of questions, we're going to try to answer questions that would apply to most people. If you have a very unique situation, we will remind you that we have mentors available all day tomorrow who are also on this webinar getting the same information that you all are as well. So we will circle back to that contact information. But for now, I have a question from someone, and they were wondering if it's safe to apply for PPP through PayPal, Square, Fundera, and some of the third-party organizations.
So that's a good question. I can only give you my opinion on that one. I think that if you have the opportunity to apply through your local bank, that you should do that, because your industry is well known here in Maine. I mean, the fishing, aquaculture is the backbone of Maine. And so many bankers understand your business. And my thought would be that if you were to apply through one of those other groups, they may not have the same understanding, and they may not, they may speak in one particular language that is really driven towards, you know, the brick and mortar retail. And I don't know that for a fact, but I'd say first off, go to your local bank. And I do know also that this next round of funding, that they're pushing a big portion of that funding to go directly to smaller banks and to credit unions.
So I'm going to go back to sole proprietor for PPP and EIDL, or mostly for PPP. There's a lot of questions kind of that are similar in the Q&A box. And I know you went over this a little, but I think it would be helpful to state again, just around how to calculate what they're paying themselves for the PPP, how to document that, whether it's going to be forgiven. And again, I know you've kind of gone over that, but I think it would be helpful for everyone to lay that out again.
Yeah, sure. So a sole proprietor, from a tax basis, they filed one tax return, and there's a schedule within their tax return that's called a Schedule C. And that Schedule C, I believe it's line 31, is what they're going to use to determine what their payroll is. So they're going to take that number, that number out of line 31 from their Schedule C. They're going to divide by 12, and that's how they're going to come up with their monthly payroll for a sole proprietor. And then they're going to take that number and they're going to multiply it by 2.5. And that's the amount that they will be eligible to apply, or that they would qualify for through the PPP.
Okay. I have another PPP question. In order to achieve maximum forgiveness, is it based on the average FTE per week, or just if you have full-time FTEs by the end of the 8-week period? And what happens if the 8 weeks ends before June 30th?
Right. So that's a good question. I've asked this question myself, and all I've been told is that you have up until June 30th to be fully back up and running, staffed. So my assumption, based on what I've read, which I think is more than assumption, but what I've read directly from the SBA, is that you have until June 30th to be fully back up to whatever number you based that payroll on.
All right. So what happens if you are fishing, but you were drastically reduced in your fishing effort? How do they quantify that? And are you eligible at the point if you aren't shut down already? I assume that's towards
So,
PPP.
yeah, even if you are still operating your business, you still can apply for the PPP, and you should apply for the PPP. So you would absolutely apply. You'd use whatever one of those 3 scenarios that I showed earlier, and you would apply for it. And it's not like unemployment where you can't be working, you know, where it would go against whatever. It doesn't work that way. So definitely figure out what your average monthly pay would be, and apply.
Okay. Following up on the last question about the Schedule C, if there was a follow-up, if someone has nothing in that box, or if they don't have a Schedule C, what else would they go to as the document?
Yeah, so, you know, many of us, including myself, I've owned a small business for 30 years. So we, you know, that bottom line, you don't want it to be too big. That's often the case. And a lot of businesses will take draws, right? And that's kind of how they pay themselves. Unfortunately, the way the program is written is that is what they will use, the banks, to define how much you qualify for. So in that case, that's when you may want to consider doing unemployment. So there are times where you're going to have to look at the 2 programs and figure out which one would be better for your situation. So in that particular case, where line 31 was 0, or I don't know how else, if they're in business, if they're not a 1099, they would be reporting their income, or if they didn't report their income, I don't know. But that's a case where they may be better off applying for the unemployment than the PPP program. And I also, if I could, I just wanted to circle back. I did get an answer, a definitive answer on the question about the S Corp and the K1. So with an S Corp, an owner is supposed to pay themselves a minimum salary, which is determined by the industry they're in, and so on and so forth. And then on top of that, oftentimes what they'll do is they'll pay themselves the minimum salary on payroll, and then the very minimum, so that then they can take the rest of it and distribute it on a K1. And when it goes on the K1, they're not paying a portion of taxes. So anything on that K1 from an S Corp would not be considered as part of payroll. So that question from earlier. However, oftentimes you'll get a K1 if you are with an LLC or something. That's a different scenario. But for an S Corp, if you have a K1 that you're reporting, you will not be able to use that to factor in for your payroll number.
Mary, you're on mute.
Sorry, I thought I unpressed it. If you receive an EIDL advance, can you still choose to turn down the EIDL loan?
Yes, you can. Mm-hmm.
The next question is, should a single member LLC owner applying for PPP automatically apply for the $1,000 EIDL for one employee as well?
Absolutely. You should apply for both programs. And that's why I say that it's very important to remember that you, even if you're the one person in the business, you are considered the employee. So yes, apply for the EIDL, which if it was that one, you would get up to $1,000. And then also apply for the PPP. Absolutely.
How should we handle it if we receive EIDL advance funds after receiving the PPP loan?
Okay, so that's a good question. I think that originally when they came out with the program, or I know the SBA on the second application, they were going to fund that advance within 3 days of people applying. And then obviously they weren't able to meet that. The system was overwhelmed. So if you have taken out a PPP and you've also applied for an EIDL and you received your funds for your PPP, but you didn't receive the EIDL, on that application, you would have said for the PPP that you had not received any. So we don't know exactly how they're going to handle it, but my assumption is that when you ask for forgiveness at the end of that 8-week period that I talked about in the presentation, that you'll be asked again at that point whether you received an EIDL advance payment.
I have a question. If you're married and each person has a separate Schedule C, 2 employees, sole proprietors, would they each apply separately?
No matter how, if I own 3 separate businesses myself, I could apply for those 3 different businesses. So yes, each spouse could apply separately for their businesses.
I think we've answered this question, but I'm just going to say, ask it. I understand how to use self-employed income to determine the PPP loan amount, but once you actually get the loans, you need to then make yourself an employee in order to qualify for the forgiveness credit.
I haven't read anything about having to change the way that you paid yourself in the past. So I have not read anywhere that you need to hire a payroll company and do it anything differently than you've done in the past.
I have 2 questions here that I think we can answer. Someone's just asking, can either of the loans be available for crew members or sternmen?
Absolutely. So again, if it depends on how they are paid. So if the sternmen and the crew members are paid with a 1099, they apply on their own for the PPP. If the captain is also the owner of the boat, and let's say his sternman he pays on payroll, and then his deckhand is a 1099, the sternman would be part of the boat owner's application, and again, the deckhand would apply on their own through the 1099.
We have multiple questions asking this. If we get the PPP and use it to pay ourselves as sole proprietor or as 1099 employees, are there restrictions to what we can use the money for once we pay ourselves? For example, can I use the money to pay myself and then pay my daily living expenses like rent, food, and utilities?
You can do whatever you want with the money after you pay yourself. You can even write me a check if you want. Whatever you want to do with it is fine.
But it's just a matter of what will and won't be forgiven.
Absolutely, right. That's exactly right. So if they're using the money for what it's intended for, which is payroll, so they're paying themselves, that's what they need to be concerned about.
Hey, Jessica, I'm going to jump in for one quick second. I got a text that I think is a really interesting question for both the panelists to try and contemplate. And it's, if your PPP loan is not forgiven and turned into a grant, right? So if it's a loan, do you then retroactively qualify for unemployment?
I would think that would be because they didn't use the funds as the program was set up for, and it's set up to pay payroll and the other items that I talked about, which is interest on mortgage, rent, utilities, lease payments. So I don't see how that would work because they just misused the funds and what the program was set up for.
Yeah, I agree. The intent of the PPP is covering payroll, and also included in the new unemployment provisions are some pretty strict clauses around fraud. So I think that might, be in that category.
All right, so I think we'll take another 5 or so minutes of questions. So I'm going to try to rapid fire these and we'll try to get through as many as we can. Clarification, is the PPP program not considered taxable income on 2020 taxes?
That's correct.
Yeah, I think maybe, so I've gotten this question before. Susan, you know what, they might be asking, if you pay yourself, there would be taxes on that, but the loan itself isn't taxable, right?
As it's what I received from the SBA is it's not considered taxable income.
Right, but if you use it to pay yourself,
then
you'd have income taxes on it.
Yeah.
So the loan itself is an income. So I think sometimes the question.
Exactly. That's right.
All right. Is the gross payroll, including the employee's deductions like FICA, federal and state withholding, all applicable under the PP loan as gross wages?
Yes, they are. The employee side, yes. Mhm.
Okay. On the EIDL program, do you have to do the online application all the way through in one sitting?
Okay, so if they looked at the first one, that's probably why they're asking that question. The new one that's out is not a big deal. And no, they don't. You can save as you go along. But the new application, actually, I'm not exactly sure if you can save as you go along. It's just a couple of pages. So the new, they probably saw the old one, which was, yeah, very, very difficult. And you had to save because there's no way to get through it all at once. But the new one is very short, and it literally probably will take 20 minutes to get through the application. So when you go into the application, since I can't exactly remember, the old application, there was a save button at the top on each page. Just look, and if it's there, you can save and go back in. My assumption is probably not, because they maybe don't want to set up a lot of profiles in the system, which was part of the reason why it crashed before.
So this is getting a little more specific off a question that I asked you already, but it's kind of getting deeper into it. So as a sole proprietor with a PPP, once they've received the money, again, how do they document that they paid themselves, as they don't usually cut themselves a check? My 2020 taxes won't be done in time for the request for forgiveness, so cannot be using the line 31 of 2020 taxes.
Well, whatever they use to pay themselves, they should write themselves a check and just keep record of the check that they wrote to themselves. So,
yeah, change up how you do it.
Exactly. Just write yourself a check and keep a record of those checks when you pay yourself.
Okay. This is just some clarification that reduced hours also qualify for unemployment.
Yes. And reduced income too. So if you were fishing and pulling in a haul that netted something, and now because you can't sell to the restaurant business, you're selling less, that follows the same kind of line of discussion, and you're qualified to apply for unemployment.
If I applied for EIDL but didn't get a loan yet, do I ignore the EIDL part of the times 2.5 plus EIDL box? I assume that's on the PPP application.
Yeah, if you haven't received anything from EIDL, you would ignore that or put 0, whatever, because whatever the truth is at the time of the application is, you just want to be truthful on that application. So yes, you would ignore that.
Okay. This question is, if you're a sternman on a lobster boat and you get a 1099, are you saying that they should wait, or which program could they apply for right now?
What they can apply for right now is the PPP. And what Cynthia was talking about is unemployment. So again, they can apply for the PPP. Well, technically, maybe not right now. As soon as it's funded, which hopefully be tonight or tomorrow or very, very soon, they can apply for that for sure. But you know, some people are looking at weighing out what option would be better. Is it better to take the unemployment because of the additional $600? So just do the math. Take your 1099, divide it by 12. Take that number, multiply it by 2.5, and that's how much you'll get. And then look at the unemployment end of it, with probably Cynthia's help, to determine how much you would be eligible for unemployment.
Yeah, that's right. And so on the unemployment side, what we're advising sole proprietors to do today, absent guidance from DOL, is to take their annual income from their 18 or their 19 taxes, whatever's available, and divide by 4 and divide that by 22 to get your weekly. And then you simply, figure out how many weeks you qualify for. And then for that period of time, which is roughly April through July, you can add an additional $600 a week for that incremental piece and kind of do the math to figure that out. Now, it could be that unemployment would be more favorable than that if the seasonality piece that we talked about before comes to pass. We just don't know.
All right.
One last question.
Yeah. This person has suggested online that they should apply for the PPP with multiple lenders. Is that
No, I don't advise that at all.
okay?
You have go to your lender, apply. You can only get one PPP loan program, and go to your lender and apply. They'll tell you very quickly if they're not taking more applications or they don't accept them, then go to a different lender. But definitely only one at a time. And I saw a question pop up too about if you don't have your 2019 tax returns done, is that a non-starter? It absolutely is not. Many do not have their tax returns done because we've all been extended until July 15th. So they are accepting 2018 tax returns.
Okay. Thank you, Susan and Cynthia, for answering all those questions. And we got through a lot of them. I see that there are some left. So we will do our best to have these answered and to post a Q&A document, hopefully on MCFA's website at some point tomorrow. But we will also have this webinar and the PowerPoint slides up later tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to Karen now.
Thank you, Jessica and Mary. Great job. I also want to say thank you to you, Susan, Cynthia, and Steve for sharing your time with us and your valuable expertise. I'm going to throw it to Ben, our fearless leader, and for some closing statements.
Yeah, thank you. That was fantastic. I know I learned a lot, and I hope everybody else did as well. I don't want to miss one other piece of information that everybody needs to be thinking about. And so there is $300 million, a little bit more than 300 million, that's been set aside for the seafood industry. And while that is a nice gesture, and it was a very important thing to have that in the bill, in the CARES Act, that $300 million is being spread around the entire nation for the seafood industry from top to bottom. So those working out on the water to those processing to those selling. So there's that money's not going to go very far. And so one of the things that we are going to be encouraging everybody to be doing within our communities and around the country is starting to share our stories of the struggle. If you are experiencing a struggle, we need to share that with our delegation. We need to share that with Congress and in our governor's office. And so we really need to start to talk about, if there's going to be a round 4 of funding, how do we make sure that the seafood industry has an opportunity to tap into some additional funds? As I said earlier, the funding that we're talking about today, the PPP and the EIDL, those 2 funds are going to go insanely quick. We're talking potentially 24 hours and that money will be spent down. So you need to move quickly. And then we need to start thinking about the next steps. And so if you have a story that you want to share, if there's anything that you think that could be valuable, that we need to know about how the COVID and pandemic is impacting your business, please reach out to the Maine Coast Fishermen's Association. We're here to help. We're working down in DC to try and make sure that your voices are heard all the time. So with that being said, I thank you again to our volunteers and our experts who did a fantastic job, to the staff who made sure that this ran very smoothly. And then reminder, tomorrow, act. Tomorrow we are coining this a day of action for Maine fishermen, for fishermen around the country. If you want to participate in these programs, we have a very short window. Get your stuff done tomorrow. We've got people on call ready to help you. Take advantage of them. This is going to be a long slog through the impacts of this. It's not going to be over just in this summer. So there's going to be a long tail to the impacts of this on our fishing businesses. Take advantage of the resources that the government's making available to you, and reach out to us if you have any questions. Okay, with that, I think we're all done. This will be posted on our website later tonight. There will be an audio version. There will be a video version. We will be trying to take as many of the questions and building a transcript around that as well. So hopefully we'll have a lot of resources for you guys to tap into over a very short period of time. Once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on the other side.